When you lose bee populations, you have impacts on global food security, but also on nutrition security. I'm Thomas Cherico Wanger, and I am an associate professor here at Westlake University for sustainable agricultural systems and engineering. So when we talk about bees, we talk usually about a service that is called pollination. So what is pollination? It means that we have little insects, in this case the bees. They visit the flowers, they take the pollen and they transport the pollen to another flower of the same species. And in terms of the food crops, this is usually what generates the yields, right? Bees are globally important for about 3/4 of agricultural production, either directly in terms of the yields, but also in terms of the quality of the food. But then what is also remarkable about bees and pollination is that almost 100% of vitamin C from crops is only possible to harvest because of pollination from bees. When we look at China specifically, we have 84 main crops that are produced in China, and they are in some way or the other depending on pollination, and that culminates to an economic value of about $106 billion US, and that's about 19% of China's agricultural production value overall. So, you know, pollination really has a substantial effect. What is also noteworthy is that the area of crops that are pollinator dependent has substantially increased. But at the same time, due to effects on pollinators that I'm sure we're going to talk about in a minute, these yields have become extremely variable and therefore causing problems for global food security. So it's extremely important, pollination as a service provided by bees, by bats, by birds, by various other critters, but then also to think about how they're affected by which drivers and how we can mitigate these drivers. One of the big issues when we talk about sustainability related or sustainable development rather, and on the effects on bees, we see dramatic declines of bee populations. In some regions of the world, you have declines of about 40% for some of these bees, and that is primarily driven by habitat, by land use change, primarily from agriculture. That is then depleting the resources for bees, and of course then depletes the populations and also reduces their ability to pollinate. We have impacts on climate change that is either directly on bees, or we have shifts of flower availability and resources for the bees, that there is an asynchrony between flower availability and the bee populations when they emerge. And then, of course, we have the global, very pressing issue of pollutants. So one of the issues is a pesticide, neonicotinoid, which has been shown across the world to affect the behavior of bees, the feeding behavior of bees, the roaming behavior of bees, but also causes not only these sublethal but also lethal effects. When you lose bee populations, when you lose pollinators, not just bees, but also these bats and birds that pollinate food crops, you have impacts on global food security, but also on nutrition security. So we know fairly little of how these effects of plastic on the environment accumulate and build up. So, you know, they are deposited in agricultural soils, how they're affecting plant growth, and how that then affects flower availability and distribution and pollination services. What we're doing is we're doing experiments to understand how changing of these plastics in the soil will affect exactly these dynamics, soil, plant, and pollinators. But what we're also doing is we're tracking the behavior of bees in response to pesticides. So we have developed an experimental setup where we can basically tag bees with little miniature QR codes, and then we track the movement of the bees and track their feeding behavior, track their roaming behavior based on the exposure to pesticides, to plastics, combinations of the two. And we can then, better understand how in a lab environment these emerging pollutants are affecting bees. And based on that, we can contribute towards developing standards, like how can we better manage bee populations in response not only to these pollutants, but also what do we need to do to kind of provide more resources in the event of land use change. Where can we provide flower resources in agricultural landscapes to provide nesting resources for these bees, so that you don't lose the capacity of pollination and their ability to contribute to food production in China and globally. The goal is to first understand the implications, the impacts of pollutants on bees, to then subsequently derive predictions of what that means for food security.